The advent of the flying bomber changed the nature of warfare. Wars were no longer confined to the immediate battlefield, as waves of bombers roamed far and wide across an enemy country, targeting their entire war machine by hitting the factories producing the tools for war. However, despite its promise, bombing campaigns have proven extraordinarily costly in terms of aircraft and the lives of the crews that man them. During World War II, bomber crews had to run the gauntlet of enemy fighters swarming the skies, and anti-aircraft fire and flak so thick that crews joked they could walk on it. As if this wasn't dangerous enough, the fact that so many bombers were in the sky presented other risks, be it from collisions, unintentionally shooting at one another, or even dropping bombs on a friendly aircraft. Statistically speaking, aboard a bomber such as a B-17, only 2 of the 10-man crew would ever complete their tour of duty, but with such danger, there is often heroism. In today's episode, we're going to look at 3 dramatic tales of heroism from the members of bomber crews during the fight against the Axis powers of World War II. Welcome to Wars of the World. Hailing from Adamsville, Alabama, Henry Erwin had ambitions of joining the US Army Air Corps and becoming a pilot, and looked set to do so once he had been called up for military service on February 3rd, 1943. Unfortunately, Erwin was not a natural pilot and was washed out of the training program in Florida, after which he transferred to the technical school at Kielce Air Force Base, eventually training to become a radio operator and mechanic. Upon completion of his training, he was assigned to the 52nd Bombardment Squadron, 29th Bombardment Group, flying as part of a Boeing B-29 Superfortress crew, conducting raids against the Japanese home islands. These were exceptionally dangerous missions, many of which were flown without escorts, the crew relying on the B-29's superlative performance and defensive weapons for protection. For any crew that found themselves being brought down over Japan, capture by the Japanese was considered worse than death, as they concocted many brutal punishments for the airmen bombing their country. On April 25th, 1945, Erwin, now a staff sergeant, was flying with his crew in their bomber, dubbed City of Los Angeles, acting as the lead aircraft on a raid against a Japanese chemical plant in Koriyama. While having only been on operation for a few months, Erwin had already made a name for himself as a brave and capable crewman, having been awarded for his actions in combat twice. During this particular mission, Erwin had the task of igniting and deploying a phosphorus bomb to mark the target for the following B-29s. Erwin pulled the pin on the bomb and placed it into the chute to release it from the aircraft, but something went wrong, and the fuse ignited while still aboard. Burning at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the phosphorus bomb then hit him in the face as it was blown back inside the cabin, which quickly filled with smoke so thick that no one in the cockpit could see their hands in front of their faces. The phosphorus bomb had burned Erwin's face, hands, and ears, and part of his flight suit was on fire, but nevertheless, he knew what had to be done, and managed to find the bomb despite being blind. Placing it under his armpit, he felt his way to the pilot's stations, where he opened the co-pilot's window and hurled the phosphorus bomb out of the aircraft. Recalling his actions later, Erwin said that he had only walked 13 feet to the window, but with the phosphorus burning under his armpit, it felt like he had gone miles. However, the danger for the crew was far from over. In the chaos and disorientation, the aircraft had entered a dive, and it was only as the smoke finally cleared that the pilots realized they were about to crash, leveling off the plane at barely 300 feet above the Indian Ocean. Landing at Iwo Jima, surgeons worked to remove Erwin's burned clothes and remnants of the phosphorus that had become embedded in his skin, which continued to burn once exposed to the oxygen in the operating room. Believing he would not survive, given the extent of his injuries, his commanding officers worked tirelessly to have him awarded the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for gallantry, before he died. A week after the incident, he received the award, but miraculously, he would survive and lived to be 80 years old, passing away in 2002. Born in San Francisco, Ralph Cheli was studying at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania when he decided he wanted to become a flyer and joined the US Army Air Corps in February of 1940. Having undertaken advanced multi-engine training, he found himself as a co-pilot on a reconnaissance-oriented version of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress before beginning the war flying anti-submarine patrols. Promoted to captain in June of 1942, he transferred from the big B-17s to the highly versatile twin-engined B-25 Mitchell medium bomber and led a flight from Hamilton Field, California to Australia in what was the first major deployment of the type to the Southwest Pacific. In January of 1943, he was ordered to take command of the 403rd Bomber Squadron, flying from Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea after their previous commander had been killed, and at the beginning of March, he was promoted to Major. The squadron was primarily involved in stopping the flow of supplies to Japanese troops based on the numerous islands in the region by sinking the transport ships supporting them. To do this, Cheli and his squadron were among the first in the region to employ a tactic known as skip bombing, in which bombs were effectively skipped across the water like a stone being thrown across a pond. During August 1943, Cheli's unit was operating in support of the effort to neutralize Japanese air power over New Guinea in preparation for an Allied assault on the Japanese base at Lae. On the night of August 16th and 17th, US B-17 bombers rained down destruction on the Japanese airfields. Japanese gunners filled the skies with flak and brought down 3 of the American Giants, but photo reconnaissance the next day showed that 18 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed and the airfields had taken heavy damage. However, it was not all good news. Unbeknownst to American commanders, the Japanese had moved a large force of aircraft into the area in preparation for the Allied assault, and these were left largely unscathed. Thus, a follow-up attack was ordered quickly so as to prevent the Japanese from relocating them. On August 18th, over 50 B-25 Mitchells, including Cheli's unit, took off to make an attack on the airfields, but right from the start, the mission was plagued with problems, the biggest being the poor weather which slowed their progress and made the 15,000-foot-high mountain peaks difficult to see. As the Mitchells flew in low toward their targets, a force of 26 B-17s also began raining more bombs onto the airfields, often dropping them through thick cloud on the best guess of their bombardiers. By the time the B-25s were within sight of the airfields, the already alerted Japanese had spotted them, and the number of fighters scrambled to pursue the B-17s dived down to attack the Mitchells, with a flight of 10 Oscars focusing their fire on Cheli's B-25. As the Mitchell was riddled with bullets, the Japanese quickly found themselves under attack by a flight of American P-38 Lightning fighters, but it was not quick enough for Cheli, whose aircraft was mortally wounded, its right engine trailing smoke and fire. At low altitude and less than 2 miles from their target, Cheli knew that bailing out from such a height wasn't an option, and while he had enough power to get the aircraft to climb to a safer altitude, he decided to press on for as long as the B-25 would remain airborne and continue to lead the attack. Coming in low over the airfield, and with the smoke helping them to locate him, the Japanese gunners opened up on his B-25, but Cheli was a man on a mission and guided his bomber over a group of parked Japanese fighters. The gunners aboard his aircraft immediately began spraying them with .50 caliber fire, while the following aircraft dropped bombs slowed by parachutes to allow them to escape the blast zone. Cheli's attack had caused extensive damage to Japanese forces at the airfield, and with the P-38s covering their withdrawal, the B-25s turned for home. But Cheli knew his decision to press on with the attack meant that he and his crew would never make it, and so he transferred command to his wingman and made a crash landing in the jungle. Initially, it was believed that Cheli had died in the crash, but later it was learned he survived and was captured, being held for over 7 months, until he was one of a number of POWs executed by their captors. For his actions, he received the Medal of Honor. The Royal Air Force's Bomber Command waged a nightly war against the Third Reich that was wrought with peril. In the early stages, merely navigating to the target was an accomplishment in itself, but as the RAF, manned with personnel from all over the Commonwealth, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand and South Africa, perfected the science of nighttime bombing, so too did the Germans improve their ability to shoot them down. The RAF was forced to adopt night tactics early in the war in order to protect the bombers from German fighters, but by the end of the war, with dedicated night fighter units flying with high-speed, radar-equipped fighters, night bombing was just as dangerous as the daylight raids. Of the 125,000 personnel who served in Bomber Command, roughly half were lost, more than twice the strength of the entire RAF today. There are many stories of heroism that have emerged from the members of Bomber Command over the years, but even amongst these incredible tales, few are as dramatic and daring as the story of Sergeant James Ward. Born on June 14th, 1919, in Wanganui, New Zealand, Ward initially trained to be a teacher in New Zealand's capital city of Wellington, and was about to accept his first post in the profession when Hitler invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, sparking the Second World War. Being the son of English immigrants to New Zealand, he felt strongly enough to immediately volunteer for the Royal New Zealand Air Force, expecting to be shipped to the war zone. However, for bureaucratic reasons, he wasn't accepted for service until July 1940. Having completed his training, he was dispatched to the UK to join the New Zealand units flying with RAF Bomber Command, and was earmarked for training, rather appropriately, on the Vickers Wellington bomber, it being the RAF's policy to name bombers after Commonwealth cities at the time. Assigned to No. 75 New Zealand Squadron with the rank of sergeant, he flew as second pilot to Canadian Squadron leader Reuben Widowson, and despite the two men being worlds apart in terms of rank, they soon struck up a kinship. Ward flew his first mission with Widowson on June 14, 1941, and 5 more would follow. Then, on the night of July 17, 1941, Widowson, Ward and their crew aboard a Wellington AAV found themselves raiding Munster in northwest Germany. Despite the inherent drama outsiders normally associate with the bombing campaign of World War II, Ward and his comrades considered the raid almost routine. Having delivered their payload, they turned for home and were flying over the Netherlands at around 13,000 feet when the aircraft was suddenly rocked by gunfire. Stalking them through the night had been a Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighter, and having closed in on the bomber, it had attacked them from underneath their fuselage. Aboard the Wellington, the intercom system had been knocked out, meaning the crew couldn't communicate with one another. Ward and Widowson therefore were unaware that their tail gunner had spotted the flashes from the Bf-110's guns and returned fire with his own Browning machine guns, taking the German fighter out. However, Widowson believed it was still there and took evasive action, including diving the twin-engined bomber. Leveling off, they found that the Bf-110 had done considerable damage to the aircraft's wing, damaging the engine and landing gear and puncturing a fuel tank, sending a spray of fuel over the wing, which soon caught light and began to burn. Widowson instructed his crew to put on their parachutes and prepare to bail out, but Ward had other ideas. The crew attempted to put out the flames from inside the fuselage, at one point even throwing coffee at it, but it was no good, and so Ward knew what he must do. Tying a rope from the emergency dinghy around his waist to secure him to the aircraft, Ward clambered out of the fuselage via the astrodome used for navigating by the stars, and out onto the wing. Battling a 100 miles per hour slipstream, he crawled his way to the fire, kicking holes in the fabric skin of the bomber to give his feet something to hold him on the aircraft, and he managed to extinguish the fire by smothering it with a torn piece of canvas, Widowson masterfully keeping the aircraft level as best he could the whole time. With Ward clambering back inside, Widowson decided to push on for home, landing at RAF Feltwell in Norfolk with a battered and burned Wellington and an incredible tale to tell. For his courageous actions, Ward was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award for gallantry in the British Commonwealth, he being the first of 3 New Zealand airmen to receive the medal. It was reported by his fellow flyers that after the incident, he suffered bouts of PTSD brought on from the smallest of things, such as the flame from a lighter, which would send him back to the wing of the burning Wellington. Ward was soon given his own Wellington and crew and began operations targeting Brest. However, his propaganda value to New Zealand was such that it was decided to send him home so he could help stir up support for the war. The transfer was approved on September 15th, 1941. That same night, Ward's Wellington was hit by another Bf-110. He held the aircraft steady for as long as possible to allow his crew to bail out safely, but he was unable to do so and died when the aircraft crashed near Hamburg. Once again, Ward had put his crew's safety above his own. And there you have 3 stunning tales of bomber bravery from World War II. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.